welcome to the Equity in Program Design and Implementation training. Today's training will be focused on the ways in which equity can be centered throughout the design process, from application through evaluation. The topics we will cover today will be the design to the margins lens and the equity-centered design and implementation component.
So we're going to start by introducing the concept of designing to the margins as it pertains to systems and programs. Currently, systems are designed to serve the people who live at the center of society. These are people with racial, economic, gender privilege, and this extends to people with language privilege and housing privilege, and so on. In order to meet the needs of the whole community in an equitable way, programs must expand to account for the experiences of people who live their lives on the margins. This requires acknowledging what institutions don't know and asking folks who are most impacted in our communities what they need and what their proposed solutions are, and then putting resources behind those solutions. So what does it mean to design to the margins? And what does it mean to say that current systems are designed for folks at the center? A design to the margins lens is central to building equitable systems and programs because current systems are designed to serve folks who live at the center. And so they miss the experiences, which includes the barriers and also the wisdom and solutions of folks who experience life at the margins in one or more ways. We're going to zoom in a moment and look at the details in this image more closely. But before that, there are a few broad points that need to be made. Each one of the lines starting from the center and heading out to the margins represents one of the many identity markers that combine to make up how human beings identify themselves and are identified by other people. Additionally, each line does not contain every possible way that a person might identify. They're meant to be examples to highlight the concept rather than a definitive and comprehensive workup of the way that people identify. Since many of you who are watching this design programs that are designed to serve folks experiencing houselessness or food insecurity, people who are seniors, or folks with disabilities, you may be wondering how this concept can inform your program design. Because our systems are designed to the center, many support programs are designed around one identity marker, such as income or disability status. But people don't live their lives with only one facet of their identities. Folks who identify as LGBTQ and are experiencing houselessness face different barriers and may need different support services than folks who have disabilities and are experiencing houselessness. Parents of young children may need different supports and come with different experiences than folks who do not have children. And of course, people come in every combination of these identities and more. This concept, the idea that humans live at the intersection of our multiple identity markers, is called intersectionality, and it is at the core of a design to the margins lens. In order to design equitable programs, jurisdictions need to consider the multiple overlapping identities of the people being served so that their needs can be met equitably. So let's take a look at the graphic itself. At the center of the shape, you will see a red octagon. The folks who fall within this shape are the folks that the system is designed to serve. That does not mean that folks in the center cannot have real hardship and struggle in their lives, nor does it mean that folks on the margins cannot thrive. It simply means that when people interact with systems, and when those systems are necessary to meet people's needs, the folks at the center are who the systems are designed to support, and so may have an easier time having their needs met. And of course, many people find themselves on or near the margins in some respects, and at the center in others. So we're going to start by looking at the line that starts in the center and heads straight out to the right. This is the line that represents race. Race is not the only identity marker that shapes the human experience, but race was and is foundational to the way systems in this country were created, and specifically the way they were created to serve some folks at the expense of others. At the center of this line are white communities. Heading out towards the margins, you'll see brown communities and then Black communities. Remember that these are not all of the ways people may identify, but are meant to be thought of as examples. Moving counterclockwise, so this is now from the center heading out to the right on a diagonal, this represents gender. At the center, we have cisgender men. And for folks who may not be entirely sure what the word cisgender means, it means that the gender identity that someone was assigned at birth, right? So somebody said, it's a boy or it's a girl, that gender identity matches that person's gender identity. Moving out towards the margins, you'll notice cisgender women, non-binary folks, and transgender people. And transgender means people for whom the gender assigned at birth does not match their gender identity. The line heading straight upwards represents age. Systems were designed to serve adults who have the legal agency to navigate systems on their own, as well as the life experience to be able to do so. But not all adults have the same amount or type of agency or experience. Elders sometimes lose agency, and 18-year-olds do not have the same life experience as folks in middle age. And of course, on the margins, we have children who have neither the agency nor the experience to navigate systems on their own. The next line over regards disability. So you'll notice that at the center, we have temporarily able-bodied people, then people with temporary disabilities, and then people with disabilities. This is a good moment to stop and point out that within every identity marker, there is so much more complexity that can be shown on a graphic. For example, folks who have mobility impairments, folks with emotional disabilities, and folks with intellectual disabilities will experience systems in very different ways. Some disabilities are easily recognizable, while some are undetectable by others, and these variables all impact the way folks experience systems. The line heading directly left is around housing status. The system is designed to serve homeowners. Then heading out towards the margins, we see renters and folks who are living in temporary housing, and then folks experiencing houselessness. The line starting at the center and heading down toward the left represents language. At the center, we have English. If you speak English in this country, your language needs will likely be met in every system you encounter. And then if you don't speak English, which language you do speak will impact whether or not you have language access. The line heading straight down addresses citizenship status. Systems were designed to serve US citizens. Heading towards the margins, we have folks with permanent residency status, visa holders, and then people who are undocumented. And lastly, the line heading out towards the right represents wealth. Our systems were designed to serve folks who are wealthy, then folks who are upper middle class, working class, and lastly, people experiencing poverty. As mentioned earlier, the default is to design systems to the center. And because of this, many programs designed to address inequity are focused specifically on one or perhaps two identity markers, such as people experiencing poverty or people living with disabilities. For example, programs designed to support families living in poverty are often focused on economic levers that could address that issue, such as job training programs or increasing access to food or affordable housing. And while these levers are extremely important and absolutely should be pulled, they won't necessarily address the problem equitably on their own, because the compounding reasons behind family poverty are not only economic in nature. They shift based on race, gender, ability, etc. So for example, it is well documented that communities of color experience over-policing, and that while people of all races commit crimes at similar rates, people of color are overrepresented in our jails and our prisons. When a person is removed from their family and put in jail or prison, in addition to the trauma of family separation, one person is removed from being able to earn income to support the family. And in fact, incarceration costs families money. When this person re-enters the home and re-enters the workforce post-conviction, their ability to earn and to live in certain housing settings is deeply impacted. There is also a well-documented gender pay gap that is both true across race and substantively worse for women of color. Unemployment and underemployment are also problems across races, but people who have names that sound Black or brown are also less likely to get jobs than similarly qualified folks with white-sounding names. And so, if a jurisdiction wants to tackle family poverty through a design to the margins lens, programs would need to go beyond the previously mentioned economic levers to include supports that address the needs of folks who have experienced incarceration, gender and race disparities, and enrollment policies for housing programs.
Now we will be looking at the different components of program design. Each component of the program, from design to evaluation, presents opportunities for equitable design and harm mitigation. The first component we will be talking about today is community engagement. Community engagement is an ongoing process because it will be part of all of the phases of your programming. The second component is program design. The third component is application and enrollment process. We will also be looking at marketing and the way in which we reach communities. The fifth component is program implementation. And lastly, we will be looking at program evaluation. Before looking at each component of the program design process, here are some strategies to consider utilizing throughout. The first one is humanizing language, centering the humanity and preserving the dignity of individuals and communities. This means eliminating language that pathologizes and places the burden on individuals and redirecting the responsibility toward systems. For example, there are no homeless people. There are people experiencing houselessness due to inequity in systems. The second one is practicing cultural responsiveness, centering the experiences, the barriers, knowledge, wisdom, and solutions of community members most impacted by inequities. Identifying and dismantling barriers to access and participation, and prioritizing keeping communities intact. Lastly, resourcing communities. This can be in the form of hiring folks who are bilingual and bicultural, who represent the diversity of your community to support folks throughout the process. Remember, the process itself is the product.
The first step, and as my colleague mentioned, this is an ongoing part of the process, is community engagement. You're going to want to start by asking, who is the most harmed by the systems that are currently in place? And it's okay if you don't have a definitive answer to this question right now. This is a great opportunity to hire community members and to partner with organizations who are already on the front lines and who already have trusted relationships to lead the engagement process. This could look like hiring local caseworkers, partnering with community-based organizations that already exist, and the like. If you're not sure who to hire or who to partner with, you can look at the relationships you already have and ask who else you should be talking to. Once you've figured out who you need to engage with, you're going to engage with these community members. Again, these are the folks who are the most impacted by inequities, to learn about both the challenges that they face and what solutions work for them. The people who are closest to the pain of the problem are also closest to the solutions, but are often the furthest from power. So it's really important to ask what they would like to see happen. During this process, it's crucial that you meet people where they are. This is both true as far as space goes, so meeting with people in community centers, in churches, in marketplaces where people gather. Also, it's important to factor in time. When are people available? It's important to do this in multiple languages and promote the accessibility measures that you're creating. Perhaps you're providing childcare and food so that folks don't have to sacrifice the needs of their families in order to engage with you. And then the most important piece is how you respond to what you learn. You can and should operationalize community input and feedback throughout the design and implementation process. Consider the following question for reflection. How might you engage and honor the knowledge, time, and agency of the folks who are most impacted by inequities throughout your design and implementation process. So now that you've gathered information from impacted community members about what the needs are and what the proposed solutions would be, it's time to design your program. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, how are you going to use the information that you've gathered, right, from the people who are most impacted by inequities to design a program that promotes equity and belonging and mitigates harm? This is where it's time to engage in responsive design. So you're going to analyze the data from that community engagement, privileging the experiences of the people who are most impacted and looking for saturation points. You're going to talk to many people and they will have different experiences. They'll have experienced different barriers and have different proposed solutions. You're really looking for the common themes. So what were the commonly expressed needs? What were the commonly expressed barriers? What were the solutions that came up the most frequently? And you'll design your program around the answers to these questions. It's important to continue the engagement process throughout this portion so that you can check back in with community members and say, this is what we heard. Does this accurately reflect what you were telling us? One way to think about creating a structure for this is in that initial community engagement process to take contact information from people who want to remain engaged, and then create an advisory committee who's there for you to check back in with throughout the process. When it comes to program design, the question for reflection is this: to what extent is your program design responsive to the needs of your most impacted community members? And how do you know? An important part of program design is the application and enrollment process. It's crucial that during program design, strategies to remove barriers and to provide support are incorporated. In your program design, you can ensure that the application and the process are easy to access and to understand. You can ensure that they are accessible in languages spoken in your community. You can provide support services such as open office hours to help folks as they're going through the process in case they come up against barriers or questions. You can provide tools that people may need to support documentation collection. This is a great opportunity to partner with libraries, community-based organizations, community centers who may have computer rooms so that you can provide free access to computers with internet and printers and technical assistance during hours that meet community members' needs. It is also important during this process to mitigate hyper-regulation practices. And one of the ways to do this is in considering the documentation that will be required to participate in your program. So you can ensure that documentation requirements are as low barrier as is possible from a regulatory point of view. So an example of this would be that self-attestation is an option for documenting someone's income. To the extent that you can, include a wide range of documentation options and acknowledge these options publicly and proactively. Some forms of documentation will be easier for some people to get than others. So the more choices that they have, the more accessible your program will be. So when designing the application and enrollment process, consider this question: how might you account for and address barriers to access and participation that might be disproportionately harmful to individuals and communities who have been rendered vulnerable by our systems?
Let's talk about the marketing component of the program design process. When you are thinking about your marketing strategies, you want to think about how it is that you will publicize your program. For example, you want to consider the multiple languages spoken in your community and ensure that you are publicizing your program in different languages. You also want to publicize your program where people congregate or consume information across traditional and non-traditional media platforms. A good tip is to ask folks who are most impacted by system inequities and who are from diverse communities how and where they like to have information shared with them. What are the sources where they receive their information from? You also want to make sure that you are proactive in promoting the ways in which you are creating spaces of belonging so that you let folks know who are of all identities that they are welcome and safe in your spaces and in the way in which you are engaging with communities. You also want to promote your accessibility measures, the ways in which you are accounting for the needs of different communities, such as providing translation and interpretation. Question for reflection. How are you ensuring that the folks who need this program the most know that it is happening and know that they will be treated with dignity and respect? Now we will be talking about the program implementation component. Enrollment decision making. Develop prioritization tools and strategies that are grounded in removing barriers to access and participation. Recognize and mitigate the harm in decision making by supporting and resourcing staff in exploring all possible options to successful service provision for all applicants. Remember, different folks will have different barriers to access and participation. Lastly, ensure that systems are in place for frontline staff to advise decision makers to make needed changes as these needs for change arise. Accountability. Being accountable to community members is crucial. Making sure that you are incorporating feedback from communities most impacted by inequities into your systems, processes, and policies will be a huge aspect of building equity-centered programs. You want to make sure that you build in measures to account for systemic inequities and prevent unintended consequences, which in more extreme cases and for some programs may be gentrification or community fragmentation. Question for reflection. How is this program acknowledging, accounting for, and mitigating the harmful impacts, including unintended consequences, of systemic inequities? The last component we will be looking at is program evaluation. When you are thinking about your data gathering process and your evaluation process, you want to make sure that it is grounded in transformative practices, that you are doing your evaluation through transformative metrics. You want to design evaluation processes that preserve the dignity of folks who participated in your programs and their experiences. You want to be intentional in collecting demographic data and evaluating intersectionalities and the ways in which these intersectionalities, these identity markers, this type of data may result in folks facing barriers to access. You want to focus on the ways in which barriers are created for folks depending on the types of intersectionalities and identity markers they hold. Always being careful not to pathologize individuals for being who they are. You also want to collect qualitative data, collect ways in which folks are experiencing your programs, allowing them the opportunity to tell you how it is that you are meeting their needs or are not meeting their needs. This will all help you build stronger, equity-driven programming in the future. Lastly, you want to make sure that even at the evaluation level, you are engaging community members who are most impacted by inequities. The questions you may want to ask yourselves and pose to them is, what do you want to learn from the data you collect? Who do you need to listen to make sure that you are gathering the data that is going to be most helpful to you in the future programming? And what do the answers tell you about where you succeeded and where you can grow? Question for reflection. Who will decide whether equity goals and needs of community members most impacted by inequities were met? This concludes the Equity in Program Design and Implementation training. For more information and resources, you can go to the website at the top of this slide.